one thing we've never done with you and really would be a good preface to this conversation is talk a little bit about your clinical experience and what you saw in practice, because I think that ties so well into where you're coming from when we look at bioidenticals.
I so appreciate that, because I'm such a context is everything. And what most of us see in the social media world is just a little clip, which is just enough to create a hook, which is just enough to create some polarity, which is just enough to just piss off a lot of people and really get us nowhere in dialogue. And so I'm hoping that people will get curious and want to lean into the whole conversation and not just some little clip around this. But my experience with hormones actually started with myself, and I should start with that. I was 9 years old when I started menstruating, terrorizing and traumatizing the entire third grade.
9?
Right,
wait,
9.
Just
That's
stop for
right.
that. Nine's early, right?
Yes,
Can we just point that out? Okay.
Yeah, and especially back in 1980.
Right.
So not normal and not common, still not normal, unfortunately more common. And so that, a lot has changed in the last 30, 40, 50 years. But for me back then, it was definitely traumatizing. Thank God for Mrs. Richardson, my third grade teacher, who, helped me put on one of those pads that you could probably float down the Nile on, and like a belt around it, and showing me how to do it. And just the terror of that. And the young girls in my class, I learned later they actually had a whole extra class just to help traumatize all of the other girls. I didn't know that until last year at a medical conference, where I ran into one of my classmates from third grade that I had not seen since then, because I moved away shortly thereafter. And because I sort of wondered if I just was making up those stories in my own head. And she's the one, she's now actually a medical doctor, who still talks about and still keeps in touch with some of those people from that class that were still traumatized by that. So just a funny little...
Wait, they were traumatized by you getting your period?
Because at 9 years old, no one was getting a period. Right?
That's crazy.
Nobody knew what to do with that information.
Yeah.
By the time I was 11, I was put on birth control pills for my endometriosis and my polycystic ovarian syndrome. Right?
Yep.
And then they were increased in dosage and potency over the next several years, because I had so much symptoms around extreme pain and growth of endometrial tissue everywhere. I mean, everyone's like, what the hell is this lady talking about right now? But it was a hot mess. But no one treated it like it was a problem. It was completely normalized, because there was just a quick script and a pill for that. And I can still remember my mom, as I'm third grade, my mom has this moment with me where she's like, this is what's happening, gives me a mirror, shows me all my stuff, shows me the drunk and the drunk.
Oh, but that's good.
I know.
No, but that's good.
It was
Go,
amazing.
Mom.
My mom is kind of a badass. She was definitely ahead in those places. And so it was very helpful for me to start to understand my body, even though it was still being highly medicalized at that time. So fast forward, many people know my story as well. By the time I was 19, just shy of my 20th birthday, I was also diagnosed with terminal ovarian cancer. So these stories that we've all been told and still are being told, that birth control protects you from ovarian cancer, maybe not everybody. Let's just start with that. And that it was still 2 years beyond that diagnosis before it occurred to anybody, I should probably stop them. So that's where I had my own experience to go, something's going on with my hormones. No one's asking questions. They just layer caked everything else and normalized everything. And so I didn't even know these were issues, right? It would take me into medical school into the mid 90s to start to learn maybe there was a different way. So let's put that one on. Go ahead.
Well, my own toxicity curiosity is, do you feel like there was an endocrine disruptor that caused you to have an early cycle that led to an early, what I would consider an early ovarian cancer diagnosis? Not that we should ever get one, but that seems correlated to me.
Yeah. Well, there's a few things. Now, hindsight's 2020, right? So I would still and continue to 34 years later of my cancer diagnosis. But all those years later, I started learning things that, oh, look, we lived in or around 4 Superfund sites, lots of military bases around us in Wichita, Kansas. At the time I was in 3rd grade in Evergreen, Colorado. My stuff was more likely exposure from when I was growing up in Kansas before I was there for a couple of years. I was only in Colorado for a few years at that time. The other piece that was no one was asking questions about was and this, maybe we're hitting this really heavy coming right out of the rounds here, but sexual abuse happening in my household and in my family of origin that was completely, even I can still remember Mrs. Richardson asking me questions and no one in my family of origin wanted to address them. It would actually be a taboo topic with my mother up until just a few years ago. We couldn't really talk about what was going on. It's who I am today. That it's like those were things that were changing in my hormones. So it would probably have been helpful for the doctors to have asked those questions when I was diagnosed with cervical dysplasia at 14 and again at 16. Nobody knew about HPV or those things at that time. So I'm just planting those seeds that there were contributing factors that were on the psychological, that were on the toxological, but also we were very poor. We lived on very processed food, very, kind of latchkey kid type of stuff, that it was very processed, highly ultra processed foods, lots and lots of sugar. I did not like meat. As a kid, I only wanted veggies. And by 16, I made myself a vegetarian, but it really wasn't. It was a carbitarian with like Velveeta cheese.
I was one of those. I was one of those in my early 20s. I was a carbitarian.
Right. And being a carbitarian, what that did was that it would take years before I understood that I have certain single nucleotide polymorphisms that mean that I needed animal protein to get certain cofactors to help me methylate and detoxify. I also learned years later that I'm missing major SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms of glutathione. So my body doesn't know how to take out the garbage. So all the things I was being exposed to. And then because of my diagnosis, I was one of the early tests done on the BRCA mutation and learned I had BRCA mutation as well, not until 1996. And so now you look, and I guess the point of telling this story is there's never one reason, right?
No,
for anything.
Yes. And I was going to say, what a perfect storm in the wrong direction. Like, wow.
Right. And then when you look at my SNPs, every single sort of bastardized process in how we metabolize our hormones, I have lots of those. So triple homozygous COMT SNPs, mutations in my CYP1B1, my mutations in CYP1A1, several other SNPs in SHBG. So no wonder I had polycystic ovarian, like just all the patterns. I had the storm to not be able to even metabolize my own hormones well, but any exogenous disruptors. I also grew up in farmland in Kansas at the time when they started to spray more systemically. So likely endocrine disruptors from the pesticides and glyphosate, eating a very highly processed diet loaded with those things. It would still be years before I learned I had celiac disease, like all the layers. So I say that because this is also part of our discussion today is there's not ever one cause or one treatment, and there's not one size fits all in how we look at this or discuss this.